Hello. Oh dear, Blazing Tommy D has a new look. So in the last several sections of this, or this segment, I guess you'd say, the justice and selling your soul. I was discussing why the 11th Amendment ought to be abolished. Now, as you know, this Tom Hartman person and Bernie Sanders of Congress have this amendment to redefine corporations or deprive them of protection under the 14th Amendment. And it just seems strange to me that if these people are so interested in justice and they want to fuck around with the 14th Amendment, why don't they fix the second section? Particularly as the NAACP, which is a corporation, an association. If it's an association, are they affected by this anti-corporate amendment? Well, anyway, the NAACP has been pointing out that the various states are instituting these laws that abridge a person's ability, a person's right to vote. And of course, the second section of the 14th Amendment is a provision which allows Congress to pass remedial legislation to effectuate a remedy. Actually, it's more of a punishment, really, for states that deprive people of the right to vote. They lose representatives in Congress. Read it. Google it. Second section of the 14th Amendment. The problem there, which nobody's ever discussed that I'm aware of, except for the Federalist Society, ironically, the phony Federalist Society, I should say. They should call themselves the Anti-Federalist Society, because actually that's what they are. They've used this to make an argument that no one ever intended to protect women's rights under the 14th Amendment. Because the way that they look at this, I guess you'd say that they're radical Democrats, because they equate the right to vote with all of the other rights that a person as a human being has, or a person as a person has. Well, if that were the case, there would be nothing to worry about as far as corporations are concerned, since corporations don't vote. And the only people that do vote and the only people that have a right to vote are citizens. And the clause in the Constitution in the 14th Amendment that appertains to citizens do not apply to corporations. Interesting. But that section also, the second section, does not include anything about women. And that ought to be fixed. But these guys, Bernie Sanders, Tom Hartman, they're so concerned about justice, doing the right thing. Well, apparently they just don't give a shit about women. And the other aspect of this, of course, is the 11th Amendment. There was this controversy, for a while anyway, regarding President Obama making this issue out of the Plan B. The idea, I guess, he was trying to convey was, I'm a man, and I believe in heterosexual patriarchy, and father knows best. And after all, these 11-year-old girls, it's kind of like what conservatives were saying about, we don't want to allow children to have access to prophylactics. It's better that they have venereal diseases, get pregnant, etc. than to fuck. And if we let them have rubbers, then essentially we're saying, yes, we know that you fuck. And here, you win. Go ahead and fuck. Here's the rubbers. So I'm not really quite certain what it is that the message is with that, with Obama. But if you abolish the 11th Amendment and you have these situations where the states are trying to deprive women of various rights, such as what's referred to as reproductive rights, but in general, just rights. They're deprived of rights as people because they're women. That men feel is some men feel that women, most men actually feel that women are some sort of inferior being, that the man knows best, that the man needs to control women. Well, if you abolish the 11th Amendment and states pass legislation to this effect, then women are free to sue the states. Personally, I believe that the 14th Amendment, the way it's written, renders the 11th Amendment obsolete to begin with. However, conservatives just will not allow that to be. The states' rights is just too important a thing for conservatives to just relinquish just like that. I mean, you know, civil war, so what? And Anthony Comstock, he drove 15 women to suicide. These women that tried to be equal to men. Sexually, particularly. Oh my goodness, who do they think they are? Death to them, kill them. So a lot of these problems that these corporations or associations have, such as Planned Parenthood, that collect money, that make political statements, that have political advertising, these sorts of things that Bernie Sanders and Tom Hartman are opposed to. It would make things much easier when these states pass such legislation. Just sue them. Just go to federal court. You know, sue the state. You're depriving me of my rights as a woman. But apparently no one wants to allow women the right to do that. It's too controversial. But there's other aspects to the 11th Amendment, too. I mentioned in my other video blogs that I had been thrown off the air. I used to be an educational broadcaster at a college radio station located on the campus of SUNY Binghamton. And for whatever reason, certainly not anything that had to do with my politics, I purportedly broadcast a sound recording at 4 a.m. within the safe harbor zone that employed the word shit. And this went to the federal district court, and Andrew Cuomo intervened on behalf of the State University of New York, declaring absolute immunity under the 11th Amendment. So, you know, the First Amendment, preferred position of the First Amendment, nah, not to Andy Cuomo, not to Tom McAvoy, the district judge there. No, the 11th Amendment has to prevail. Gee, I thought that first came before, you know, it was the First Amendment, the 11th Amendment, and then the 14th. Well, the 14th comes after the 11th. Well, so what is it with Andy Cuomo? Is Andy Cuomo, is he like an enemy? He doesn't like the First Amendment? No, the thing with Andy Cuomo is he just doesn't give a shit about the First Amendment. He's a Democrat. He's doing the Democrat thing. He's from New York State. So the New York State Democrat thing is you become the New York State Attorney General, and then you become the governor, and then you become President of the United States. And everything else, whatever you do in the meantime, doesn't mean a goddamn thing. You know, whatever gets you from one step to the next, everything else is irrelevant, because no matter what you do, the Democratic Party's going to be there writing back you going, well, it was interesting when I brought this case. It was a shock to me that they declared they declared absolute immunity under the 11th Amendment. Well, some of these cases that this person, it was a young woman, either a very ambitious young woman, or maybe Tom McAvoy's girlfriend or Andy's girlfriend, who knows. Now, some people will say, well, that's disparaging of women. Well, this particular woman, there was no love lost with her in terms of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 11th Amendment was like so important to her. And these cases that she cited were kind of interesting because they had to do with what states had done in the past with welfare money, because, you know, a lot of states don't like the idea of welfare. They don't like the idea of nigras being able to have money from the federal government. They don't like the ideas of mandates by the federal government. Or is it that they just don't like the idea of welfare? Well, what states decided to do when they had problems balancing their budget, because that's also an aspect that appertains to the 11th Amendment, that states have to have balanced budgets. When they'd run into problems balancing their budget, they would take money that they received from the federal government that were mandated to people that were eligible for welfare, that were entitled to these payments, and just take it. Just steal the money and use it to balance their budget. And then when these people that were entitled to their welfare checks sued in federal court, the judges said, no, sorry, you can't sue. Can't sue the state. They're absolutely immune under the 11th Amendment. Well, none of the people at Occupy Wall Street give a flying fuck about any of this at all. You know, it seems as though their whole entire concern nowadays, aside from this mortgage thing, is this corporate personhood. And it's unjust because there's all these other injustices that could be more readily, or that could be remedied, more readily dealt with, and they're not. And I wonder why that is. Because I think that this whole thing was planned this way to begin with. And it's really a crazy thing. I think that this, it doesn't really matter what I think in this regard. And it doesn't really matter what their intentions are. What matters is what they're not doing. What they could be doing and they're not doing. What they're ignoring. Nobody is taking up this issue. And it really pisses me off. Not because I brought the issue up, because it's something that I know about, and it's something that could benefit people in the United States that have been injured, not just under the First Amendment, but under, you know, things that regard welfare, things that regard women's rights. Why isn't anyone discussing this or addressing it? Why won't they?